Before we continue, I'd like to make two remarks on the matter we dealt with before the break. That is how to get the text of video and audio clips correctly on the transcript. First of all, I would like to emphasize that although the assistance of the interpreters to see whether the written text reflects what is in the original is highly appreciated, at the same time it's not their task and it's not their responsibility that this is a correct interpretation. So therefore, we do appreciate if the interpreters would inform us about any striking difference between they notice between the text originally spoken and they see on the written text. Therefore, again, it is assisting us in achieving the best result, but it's something extra and not within their task and not within their responsibility. Nevertheless, if they find anything that makes clear that the translation does not reflect, and I'm talking about not half a word, but really important differences, that's highly appreciated if they will draw our attention to that. Second is that working on the basis of the written text on the bottom of the screen is not very is not very easy to do. Therefore, the parties should provide, and I see that the first steps may have been taken already, that they should provide the booth with hard copies of at least the English text, but preferably also the original text, so that the interpreters, if they're doing this extra work, that they don't have to work from just 4, 5 or 6 lines on the bottom of their screens, which is very difficult to do. So therefore the parties should provide the booth with hard copies of transcripts, preferably in 2 languages, if that's not possible, at least the original language. Then apart from that, what further is reflected on the transcript, what appears in the transcript, is a matter the Chamber would like to be in charge of under all, in every respect. That means even where we encourage a good informal relationship with all those who are assisting us and the parties, that finally anything that should be verified on whether something appears or will not appear is primarily a responsibility of registry and the Chamber. And therefore any such contacts which would have any impact on what we finally find in the transcript, it's appreciated if the Chamber, as was done today, is informed about such contacts. Mr. Webster, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. As my colleague Antigua announced, let me address in more detail the crimes for which the prosecution says the accused are responsible. Before I do that, I would like to give you a brief snapshot of the main aspects of the military offensive Operation Storm, and I will use a couple of the maps from this court binder which we have given to Your Honours, members of the defence, the registry, a couple of days earlier, but we will use these maps on the screen as well. Your Honours, the breadth of Operation Oluya, or Storm, extends beyond the scope of the indictment. Whilst the indictment focuses on the areas of responsibility of the 3 accused, Operation Storm was conducted over territory extending beyond the geographical limits relevant to the indictment, and involved the participation of an overall force of 127,000 members of the Croatian forces, including military police and approximately 2,500 members of the Ministry of Interior, the MUP. Map 15, Your Honours, in your court binder is a map that depicts the whole spectrum of Operation Storm. The focus of the indictment is the southern portion of the Krajina, where the forces subordinated to the three accused were deployed, predominantly the area of responsibility of the split military district. The manpower of the split military district for Operation Storm, as Mr. Tigo already said, amounted to approximately 30,000, including 10,000 newly mobilized troops. On map 15, if we can focus now on the southern part of map 15, you see the line up of the Croatian forces involved in Operation Storm. Grouped clockwise, shown in yellow, starting with the 4th Guards Brigade, and ending at the other side of the spectrum with the Special Police, commanded by the accused Markac. These are all the units, Your Honors, listed in Annex A of the indictment. On the same map, you can see the defending forces, the RSK forces, shown in red, mainly consisting of units of the 7th Dalmatian Corps, organized mainly in brigades. Already in looking at this map, Your Honors, you can see how the SVK, the army of the RSK, was already in a pocket with the Croatian forces surrounding them at the beginning of Operation Storm. You heard a number of times, Your Honors, that Operation Storm commenced on the 4th of August 95 in the early morning hours with air and artillery support. A majority of the towns, including Knin, you know where it is, Drniš, Benkovac, and Gračac, were directly attacked with artillery. In his book, The Accused, Gotovina, the book has been cited before, Offensive Battles and Operations of the HV and HVO, wrote, and I quote, "The towns of Knin and Var were shelled from the firing positions in the Bosansko-Grahovo area," the arrow to the right, with 430mm caliber cannons. Knin was also targeted from the Miljevici area, second arrow, with the same caliber cannons. Gračac was shelled from the firing positions in the Rovaniška area. And lastly, Benkovac was targeted from the firing positions in the area of Mount Debeljak. By nightfall of the 4th of August, the SVK and RSK leadership were in disarray. Panic reigned in Knin and the inhabitants left in masses. Thus the stage was set for the HV to enter Knin the following day. Next day, already by the 5th of August, the SVK had ceased to function, following the breakup of its command and communication systems. On the 5th of August, as you already heard, HV units, mainly the 7th Guard Brigade and other units of the 4th Guards Brigade, entered Knin, seized the town, and around by midday, the Croatian state flag was hoisted at the fortress in Knin. In addition, Your Honors, to the seizure of Knin by the end of 5th August 95, the split military district controlled, according to General Gotovina's own assessment, 70% of the northern Dalmatia area, which had until then been under ASK control. The next couple of days, Your Honors, Croatian forces, including the Special Police, took control over towns such as, and I will do it step by step so you can familiarize yourselves with these locations, which will play a role throughout this trial. Gračac, Obrovac, Benkovac, Kistanje, Otrić, two towns completely destroyed. We'll talk about that later today. Donji Lapac. And finally, Srb, close to the Bosnian border. In these areas, mop-up operations were conducted searching the captured areas and small populated villages. Your Honours, turning to map 14, this is an important map. It's an HV military map signed by General Gotovina. It's map 14 in your court booklet. It displays the daily advancement of the Croatian forces from the 4th to the 8th of August. Note the legend in the bottom left hand corner, which shows the original map marking colors. Although the colors, Your Honours, in the legend have faded, it is clear from the colored arrows that the color blue, the outer ring, represents the advancing HV forces as of 4th of August. Purple, 5th of August. Green, 6th of August. Orange, 7th of August. And finally, yellow, 8th of August. The blue line across the top of the map denotes the northern border of the area of responsibility of the split military district during Operation Storm. In the initial phases of the operation, the special police commanded by the accused Makac operated predominantly in the area above that blue line. As the operation progressed, some of the special police forces were also deployed below that line and within the area of responsibility of the split military district. And I'll show you these locations a little bit later today. The blue dotted line depicts the HV front line, and next to it, the red dotted line is the SVK front line. SVK, defending forces. Both together represent the zone of separation. The blue flag-like marks positioned along the HV front line with the dark blue letters depict the HV units at their start positions on 4th August 95. And finally, on this map, at this point, Your Honours, note how the advancing troops, blue, purple, green, orange, yellow, encircle and reduce in size the Serb territory, leaving open an exit for the Serb civilians to flee towards north, the border of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And note that the captured territory as of 8th of August, which includes all of the areas covered by the colored arrows. Your Honours, on the 8th of August, General Gotovina reported that the liberation of the whole area within split military zones of responsibility and the tasks assigned to the MD were concluded. Mr. President, Your Honours, as you already heard, by the time Operation Storm was over, the Krajina was in ruins. Hundreds of Serb civilians killed, the remaining Serb population almost entirely gone. Homes, villages, towns looted, destroyed on a massive scale, livestock killed and fields burned. Let me be clear, Your Honours, the loss of lives, the killings, the devastation, the harassment of civilians, these crimes were not merely unavoidable, regrettable, isolated consequences of warfare, of the operation I've just outlined. We will present evidence about the circumstances during which these actions occurred. The evidence will show that these attacks on civilians, their lives, their property, occurred outside the military framework, were not committed in the heat of battle. There was little, if any, defense in the Krajina villages and towns which were devastated by the Croatian forces. There were few, if any, military targets in the civilian populated areas. and the overwhelming majority of the people killed were civilians or soldiers hors de combat. In short, there was absolutely no military justification in what the Croatian forces did to the Serb civilians and their property in the Krajina in August 95. Also, not only are the acts not justified by military necessity, these crimes were not isolated, random acts committed by individual soldiers. You will hear evidence that suggests that the volume, the widespread and systematic nature in which the crimes were committed, and indeed the manner in which they were committed openly with impunity over a relatively small period of time, indicates that the crimes formed part of a campaign. Your Honours, the three accused are charged with 9 counts that consists of both crimes against humanity and violations of the laws and customs of war. Charges of persecutions, deportation and forcible transfer, plunder of public and private property, wanton destruction, murder, and finally inhumane acts and cruel treatment. Your Honours, Mr. Tiger already discussed details of the shelling operation that commenced in the early hours of 4th August 95, and that was aimed at and indeed resulted in the expulsion of the Krajina Serbs. Let me focus on what occurred in the heel of the shelling. Immediately after the fall, in the afternoon of the 4th of August in Knin, Croatian soldiers began ravaging the town by breaking into homes, shops and cafes to feast on the bounty of liquor and food left for the taking. At the same time, they began looting all of the choice pickings in the town, such as abandoned vehicles, televisions, VCRs, and even furniture. Not only did they do this all over the town of Knin, but right in front of the UN compound, where they set up a makeshift staging area for the collection of looted items. The UN personnel and Serb refugees who were confined to the UN compound watched helplessly as the Croatian soldiers shot out the locks of vehicles of the Serb refugees were forced to leave behind in order to grab whatever might be inside. As the day progressed, 5 August, some Serbs were brought to the UN compound by Croatian soldiers who took photographs and ID cards from the Serbs before taking the keys to their vehicles and driving off with them. When night fell on the 5th of August, small arms fire could be heard in quick, short bursts as the Croatian soldiers cleaned the town. They also made sure to continually fire their machine guns over the UN compound to keep the Serb refugees in a constant state of panic and to intimidate the members of the UN and their local staff. And when I say cleaned the town, it's in inverted commas, of course. A witness will tell Your Honours about a young Serb female who exacted from him a promise to shoot her if the Croats entered the camp because she was afraid of being raped or worse. Such was the fear inspired by the first night of Croat rule in Knin. By the very next day, the burning had already begun. Even with the near total lockdown of all international observers, the Croats could not hide the plumes of smoke rising from towns and villages all over Sector South. Returning to the events in and around Knin on 5th August, UN military observers, the UNMOS, reported seeing houses burning in Knin, large plumes of smoke, and we can go to map number 31. This is the last map in your booklet, Your Honours. The UNMOS saw plumes of smoke rising from Benkovac. This is approximately 50 kilometers west of Knin, and the entire, and also the village of Vrdvik, and you can see that about 4 kilometers south of Knin, marked red with number 6. The entire village of Verbnik was looted and set on fire. On the same map, 31 in Gračac, this is at the top left, marked in green. A UNMO team that made it back into the town observed HV soldiers looting and almost all of the houses partially destroyed. The UNMOs also found 5 houses as well as their own former accommodation burned to the ground. In Knin, a small number of international personnel managed to make their way into the town, where they all witnessed HV soldiers continuing to damage the city in broad daylight, in front of and sometimes alongside the military and civilian police. The main street of Knin was being cleansed of the dead bodies and debris which had littered it after the shelling attack and clearing operation the night before. One witness, Jonas, will describe the 2 large cattle trucks he saw parked outside the Knin cemetery on this day, and others will describe what appeared to be mass graves being dug in the same area. New windows were being installed on most buildings along the main street, even as others in the town were burning. Fresh paint was being splashed where needed, and shell craters filled in. By the next day, all would appear quite undamaged in time for President Tudjman's arrival to the city, which would be followed by the international media. In this context, Your Honors, at trial, you will see a video of the accused Gotovina reprimanding his subordinate commanders for allowing the troops to ravage the town in the face of the imminent arrival of the president. The irony of this situation is inescapable, since the very conduct which General Gotovina appears to be complaining about is not only going on right outside the building in which that meeting is taking place, but the same conduct continued for weeks and months thereafter. And the accused Gotovina did little to stop it, much less discipline his subordinate commanders, who too failed to do so. The ingenuity of the accused Gotovina's apparent fury at the state of the Knin town is reflected in the fact that, in the depths of Knin, the real aftermath continued to be seen quite clearly. Heaps of debris from shelling and looting damage were piled high and hidden from view of the main street. HV soldiers and police continued to loot the empty houses in Knin, with the exception of those marked as Croat houses, which were conspicuously preserved. The accused Markac also appears on the video. He did equally little to prevent or punish this conduct in the weeks and months that followed. The transcript should reflect the accused Cermak. I might have misspoken. The accused Cermak, who also appears on the video, did equally little to prevent or punish this conduct. And even on the day the video was made, President Tudjman appointed him the military governor for the former Sector South. Nevertheless, despite this pronouncement and orchestrated media events, the reality is that the military authorities, members of the HV, including military and special police, not only continued to exercise authority in the southern part of the Krajina, but continued to plunder, burn, and murder their way across the countryside, ensuring that no Serb would return. Jonas, one international witness, will give you insight into the motives of the perpetrators on the ground. The HV soldiers complained to him that the looting was their reward for participating in the operation, as they were lowly paid and it was considered as part of their wages. They said that their senior commanders had specifically authorized them to help themselves to the goods. When asked about the destruction, the killing of livestock, and the poisoning of the wells, they explained that this was to prevent the Serbs from returning. The witness will tell you that he understood exactly what they were saying, because he comes from a farming background. And to destroy the infrastructure and destroy the means of a villager's livelihood would ensure that no one could return and live in that particular region. Your Honors, on the 7th of August, Mr. Akashi, the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General, arrived for a tour of Knin and to discuss with Military Governor Cermak the implementation of the 6th August agreement between the UN and the Croatian government regarding the role of UN authorities in the former Sector South under Croatian rule. A major component of this agreement was the guarantee of total freedom of movement for all UN agencies in order to monitor the human rights situation of the remaining Serbs in the region and to provide humanitarian assistance where needed. Ironically, this discussion was being held while almost the entire population of international observers and Serb refugees remained confined to the UN camp and other various collection centers throughout Sector South. When Mr. Akashi arrived, he was permitted to have a UN security escort. Some UN personnel used this opportunity to conduct reconnaissance in Knin, while others accompanied Mr. Akashi. The looting of the town had been so thorough that when Mr. Akashi asked to see an example of a looted house, one of the UN escorts, from whom you will hear, told him, "Pick any house." At this, Mr. Akashi simply pointed to a house at random, and when they entered to inspect it, sure enough, it had been totally ransacked and looted. On the 8th of August, the UN and other international personnel were finally allowed outside the UN compound. These were members of UNMO, UNCRO, ECMM and the newly created Human Rights Action Teams, or HRATs. They had been charged with observing the conduct of the warring factions on behalf of the international community, but were suspiciously prevented from doing so by the Croatian authorities during the crucial days when their watchful eyes were most needed. Your Honors, on most of these occasions, such restrictions occurred when plumes of smoke could be seen rising from the areas where the Croatian authorities would not permit the internationals to investigate. Nevertheless, through dogged perseverance and circuitous travels off the main roads, many of these internationals were able to observe and document the campaign of burning, looting and killings which occurred in the aftermath of Operation Storm. The members of the Joint Criminal Enterprise, in particularly the 3 accused, condoned the above conduct, encouraging the Croatian forces to continue. For example, the accused Mladen Markac and Minister of Interior at that time, Ivan Jarnjak, arrived in Donji Lapac. If you look at map number 15, it's approximately 80 kilometers north of Knin. Donji Lapac was completely destroyed by members of the MUP Special Police Forces, and the accused and Mr. Jarnjak commended the personnel for a, quote, job well done, end quote. However, in response to the protests from the international community to cease the conduct, lukewarm attempts were made, such as issuing orders prohibiting the conduct. However, absent any concrete steps to enforce the orders or to punish the breaches, they merely amounted to window dressings for the benefit of the international community. Regarding the widespread burning and looting which occurred, the most comprehensive documented observations of these crimes comes from the UNMOs, who conducted systematic surveys to record the damage done to villages throughout Sector South, as well as to locate it, record, and provide humanitarian assistance to the remaining Serb civilian population. The reports generated by these UNMOs, and many of them will be witnesses, during the months after Operation Storm, establish that by the 27th of August, at least 1,730 houses in Sector South were found to have been totally destroyed, and at least 2,600 were partially destroyed. As the court will hear from the UNMOs, who actually conducted these surveys, there was a standard criteria for determining whether a house was totally or partially destroyed. Specifically, if the roof or construction of a house had been damaged, it was considered totally destroyed. And if it was looted with broken windows or doors, it was considered partially destroyed. As the UNMOs gained further access in Sector South, the figures continued to climb. And, Your Honours, by 13 September, out of 18,232 houses in 240 villages surveyed, more than 13,600, which is 73%, were destroyed after Operation Storm. Only about 650, this is 5%, had been destroyed prior to Operation Storm. The vast majority, Your Honours, of this destruction was done by that time, mid-September. Nevertheless, there are further UN reports that establish that by 4th of October, the number of totally and partially destroyed houses rose to 16,857 out of 21,744, rising even further to a last accounting in 4th November, when 17,270 houses out of 22,213 houses had been totally or partially destroyed. As one of the UN observers from whom you will hear very shortly wrote, and I quote, "As the daily situation reports showed every day, the looting and harassing of the remaining population has not stopped. Even though the presence of the Croatian police has increased in some areas. The looting has decreased, but not mainly because of the increased Croatian police presence. The reason is simpler. There is nothing left to loot." End quote. Your Honours, by way of example, I would like to briefly address the situation in 3 of the towns which were devastated by the Croatian forces without any justification. The first map, using again map 31, the last map in your binder, is the town of Kistanje, located about 20 kilometers southwest of Knin. The map, on your map, it's marked in green. Before Operation Storm, Kistanje was an almost exclusively Serb town with hardly any Croat civilians living there. Your Honours, you will hear evidence about how this town was completely torched, destroyed and looted. The 15th Home Guard Regiment entered the town on 6 August 1995. One witness who defied the restriction of movement will tell you that the looting and burning started as early as 6th of August. International observers, Your Honours, confirmed Kistanje was completely destroyed. By the 14th of August, an UNMO patrol observed that about 90% of Kistanje town had been burned down. ECMM observers reported identical observations. UN CIFPOL report of 14th August said 90% of houses burned down, smoke still rising. To finish on Kistanie, as one international wrote, and I quote him, "We went through Kistanie, totally destroyed, still burning, nothing there. No people, just soldiers. No animals, nothing, but I've got here a lot of smell, strong smell of bodies." End quote. Second map, Your Honors, you have heard of this city before, Gračac. On your map, 31, it's about 40 kilometers northwest, marked in green here as well. In Gračac, 85% of the buildings were destroyed, either completely or in part. One witness noticed that Gračac was not only destroyed by burning, but also had signs that it was shelled. I quote from his witness statement, "This is the first time that it was obvious that they were a target because there were artillery holes in the ground leading to Gračac, a lot of them. So it was obviously shelled. We didn't see that because we didn't see that, for example, in Kistanie. So they used artillery on it. And if they were like the rest of them, you'd also see rockets. To my knowledge, there was nothing in Gračac of military value. It's just a town, another town with the same houses with red roofs. They got it basically destroyed, just like Kistanie, destroyed." End quote. Here are a few pictures taken by a journalist who will appear before you, Your Honors, on the 8th of August, at around the time that the special police were moving in the area. First one shows a house burning on the road leading to Gračac. Your Honors, when internationals would note that houses were burned to the ground or completely torched or destroyed, the next photo will show what they meant. This is also taken along the same road as the previous picture. On the same day, members of the special police were also seen looting. Here's a special police member hot wiring what appears to be a civilian vehicle, and then proudly driving off with it, as you can see on the next picture. And the last photo is a member of a special police loading a TV into a truck. Gračac, Your Honors, was also the place of one of the cemeteries where Serbs were buried. All the access was refused to internationals for a long time, noting fresh graves on a regular basis. At one point, internationals counted up to 81 crosses, with only 10 of them bearing any names. A number of victims that are relevant to this case, Your Honors, were exhumed from this cemetery in Gračac. Last city, or rather village, town, Otrić, Your Honors. You'll hear a lot about Otrić in this case. On map 13 again, you can see it. It's located about 27 kilometers northwest of Knin. It's located on the way on the route from Knin to Srb, which was the road taken by most of the civilians when they fled the area. Otrić, Your Honors, was completely destroyed. Again, it was a town predominantly inhabited by Serbs. Internationals stated the following about Otrić in the weeks following the attack. 11th August, ECMM reports, quote, "Every house in Otrić had been destroyed by fire," end quote. A few days later, 13th August, one of these HRAT teams, human rights group, reported that Otrić, among other towns, had been made, quote, "virtually unlivable by actions which occurred after the fighting," and that the authorities continue to take no actions. You will hear from a witness who will testify that when she went to Autrich on the 16th of August, it had been completely burned down, end quote. And that, quote, not a single house was left undamaged. I would like to add, Mr. President, Your Honors, that there are a number of HV military documents, HV, Croatian Forces, military forces documents, which make reference to these crimes. To illustrate with only two. First one, a report by the Split Military Command Organ for Political Affairs on the 6th of August. The author describes the treatment of property by the Split military personnel, Split military district personnel, immediately upon entering Knin as catastrophic. Or the operational diary of the Split military district notes on 11 August that, in relation to Autrich, we just talked about that, I quote, everything in Autrich is burned down, end quote. Killings. Your Honors, let me turn to the civilians who were killed during Operation Storm. The Croatian forces entering the towns and villages on the heels of the shelling anticipated that most civilians to have left by then. As such, when civilians who had still remained there were discovered, they were captured and intimidated, forcing them to leave. Some were threatened with physical force, weapons and firearms and ordered to leave, while others were fired at, wounded or killed. Croatian soldiers entering the civilian habitat moved from house to house and ordered the frightened civilians out and marched them or forcibly transported them out of these hamlets or villages. Those captured were transferred to collection centers or detained with the objective of preventing them from returning to their settlements. Some who had taken shelter elsewhere and attempted to return to their houses were assaulted and intimidated. Civilians who refused to leave were killed by members of the HV and special police forces while relatives and neighbors watched. The perpetrators sometimes publicly announced their crimes for the remaining civilians to hear, knowing that that would influence them to flee, induce them to flee. HV soldiers and members of the special police forces entering towns fired at civilians and set fire to civilian property, at times burning the inhabitants alive. They entered dwellings of old people who had stayed due to their inability to leave and harassed them, stealing their food and livestock, destroying any possibility for them to remain. Your Honors, the prosecution will show that over 350 civilians were killed from 4th August to 30th September 1995 in the relevant Sector South area. From these killings, the prosecution has, as you know, selected 8 killings. We call them scheduled killings, where the prosecution will show that 29 Serb civilians were killed unlawfully. In your court binder, Your Honors, again, you will find the locations of these 8 scheduled killings on the last map, map number 31. Let me discuss 3 of these scheduled killings in a little bit more detail. The first example, Mr. President, Your Honors, is killing number 2, which took place in the Plavno Valley, a valley that was particularly hard hit by Operation Storm. The location of this incident is marked number 2. The Plavno village essentially consists of a number of hamlets. One of these hamlets is Đurići. The evidence will show that in the morning of the 5th or 6th August, a few shells fell into this isolated hamlet and damaged houses. 7 or 8 civilians sought refuge in the cellar of the house of Sava Đurić. Sava Đurić, who was 53 years old at the time and physically disabled, stayed upstairs in the house with his mother. In the afternoon, a Croatian tank entered this hamlet. The Croatian soldiers were wearing camouflage uniforms and black masks. They started burning the houses. A resident from whom you will hear in due course asked a soldier why they were burning her house. The soldier responded that the Serbs had burned Kijevo in the past, so now they were burning this Serb hamlet. Your Honors, Kijevo is about 25 kilometers away from Đurići. But the soldiers did not stop at burning Đurići. They went into the house of Sava Đurić and forced him and his mother out of it. One of the soldiers took the 82-year-old mother down the road, while the others threw the invalid Sava Đurić in a burning workshop behind the house in the yard. The remains of the house and the workshop can still be seen today. This picture is the location where the workshop was and where the remains of Sava Đurić were found. The next shuttle killing, Your Honors, is the one of Grubori. It indicates that these killings were not only committed by soldiers of the Croatian army, but also the special police. Again, it occurred in the Plavno Valley, and you see the number 4, the red number 4, next to it. Members of the special police carried out what is now known as the Grubori massacre. One of the civilians victim to this massacre was 90 years old. In total, 5 people were killed. A UN camera, Mr. President, Your Honors, was in the area that day. So let me just play a very short clip. It's less than 2 minutes about what happened.
Before you do so, you used several times an adjective related to killing. You said the next. And I didn't understand the word, not being a native English speaker, but even on the transcript, I do not. Scheduled. Yes, then I understand it. So you were talking about scheduled killings. Thank you. Please proceed and play the video. You have provided the booth with the hard copy of the transcript.
Yes, we did.
Yes. Then please proceed.
Well, we visited the Plavno Valley.
We visited the Plavno Valley yesterday to meet with a group of residents in one town there, and we observed that across the valley another town was apparently on fire. There was a huge plume of smoke. So we visited that town in the afternoon, and we found that in fact almost every structure in this hillside village was in flames. The villagers said they had been called away to a meeting in a nearby village. That meeting never took place. We waited at the school and no one came. When we looked up here, we saw that everything was on fire. We rushed back. There's no one here now. There's no sign of those who stayed behind. Whether they burned or ran away, we don't know. My husband's missing. He may have been burned. Granny's missing. She may have been burned. She's very old and couldn't run away. When the fire finally died down, Dušanka and her neighbour were able to search the houses. Later, she showed the UN Human Rights team where they had found their husbands. Here, let me show you. That woman was not here. Her husband was ill. He was lying in bed over there. When we came, we found him dead. That's all I can tell you. He couldn't hear anything. He was deaf. Look, you see? He's been shot. Shot in the head.
Your Honors, you will hear detailed evidence about this killing. We also show you the numerous attempts to cover up what happened in Grubori, including by the accused Cermak and Markac. The third example of a scheduled killing is killing number 7. It's again shown on your map. It has the number 7 attached to it south of Knin. Let me just show you a few pictures so you can get the sense of the place. This one shows you the road on the right side, the main road to Knin, leading to the background of the photo. On the right side, parts of it is the gyps or plaster factory of Knin. On the left side, you see the Share hamlet. That is part of the wider Uzdolje settlement. Uzdolje gives its name to the scheduled incident. Now bear in mind, Your Honors, this picture was taken last year, so most of these houses you see have been rebuilt in the meantime. We will show you during the course of the trial video footage taken in '97, which shows most of the houses destroyed. Elements of the 142nd Home Guards Regiment entered this area on 6th of August as they advanced to meet up with elements of the 7th Guard Brigade coming from south of Knin. If we can go to the next picture, Your Honors, when the Croatian soldiers entered the Share hamlet, which you can see now on the right side, in the morning of the 6th of August, there were approximately 10 civilians in the hamlet. The soldiers gathered the civilians, with the exception of one civilian who was able to run away and hide in the woods, and one elderly and immobile woman was left in her house. These 8 civilians, Mr. President, Your Honors, were lined up and summarily executed by one of these soldiers, who described himself as Nustasha to them. This happened just by these large trees to the right of the orange house in the middle of the photo. 7 of the civilians died, while the survivor who sustained injuries to the head and thigh was able to escape. The houses in the village were burned, including the house with the old invalid woman still inside. Her family later came and gathered her bones. Mr. President, Your Honors, to finish, I would like to illustrate the numbers and facts given using 4 maps. For the purpose of this presentation, we have marked the location and the extent of the crimes perpetrated across the territory on sequential maps. Prior to presenting these maps to you, I would like to first explain the source of the map we will use in this presentation. The first map before you, Mr. President, Your Honors, is a map we have compiled from 4 different source maps. The basic map, covering most of the area, is the map you have seen earlier. It's number 14 in your booklet, the map signed by the accused General Gotovina. This map did not extend far enough north to include the area of operation of the special police under the command of Mladen Markac. So we have overlaid 2 maps depicting special police movements in the northern area of the map. In order to complete the map, we have incorporated a portion of an unperformed map in the northeastern corner and the northwestern area to ensure that the entire area is depicted. We have produced this compilation map for the reason that the 2 fundamental maps show the areas that the Croatian army and the special police had taken over and controlled at the time the crimes were perpetrated. The second map, Your Honors, includes the incidents of killings, wanton destruction and plunder for the period 4th of August to 30th of September 1995. The legend in the top left corner explains the symbols. Yellow for killing incidents, black-orange for wanton destruction, and red-black for plunder. In addition, we have marked with black dots, small black dots, evidence of the presence of the special police. As I explained before, Your Honours, as the operation went ahead, the special police moved into the area of responsibility of the split military district from up north. They moved south. The third map, Your Honours, covers the same information, but in addition, we have now overlaid it with the area of responsibility of the split military district. Your Honours, there is no better way for you to show and see the widespread and systematic nature of these crimes that were committed by the Croatian forces in the course and in the aftermath of Operation Storm, within a relatively small area and during a short period of time. Please be aware, Your Honours, each of these symbols represents atrocious crimes, the loss of lives, and the loss of homes. In short, they represent the shattering of a community and a people. The fourth and last map, Your Honours, represents only the killings, but we added the number of victims killed in each of these locations. Perhaps it can be enlarged a little bit. And I repeat, and by this I end, Mr. President, Your Honours, that we counted only civilian victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westby. Before we continue, may I inquire into some of the maps we find in the bundle? I noticed that, for example, map 9 and a lot of maps from 16 onwards are apparently projected maps, but not under a 90-degree angle, but under another angle, which, if you compare map 2 and map 4 with these maps, you'll see that the shape of the municipalities is quite different on the one map compared to the other one. And since maps are often very useful to calculate distances or make all kind of assessments, of course the scale by this projection also causes a not real proportion. What from the left to the right might appear on the basis of the scale to be 20 kilometers will not be 20 kilometers from north to south. So therefore, it seems to be a, let me say it friendly, a bit of a bad habit of the prosecution to present these distorted maps, whereas I myself, and I take it my colleagues as well, would rather have maps which allow for calculations for measuring distances rather than a kind of an impressionistic, nice-looking, distorted and projected map.
Thank you for your observations, Mr. President. We were aware of your concerns because you had uttered them in different trials.
Yes.
And that's why we have included a number of maps. Some of them are maps which are accurate enough for you to measure them. For instance, the last one is one which accurately reflects the proportions.
Yes,
and
but doesn't
indeed,
cover the whole of the terrain.
No, but there are more maps which we can
Yes,
bring.
okay, but we'll resolve it. We don't have to resolve it now, but I just draw your attention to it that measuring needs a 90 degrees projection and nothing else. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Westby referred to the second map, the third map, and the fourth map, but I don't believe I can find them in this binder, and I believe we may want to go over and use these maps.
No, I understood this to be maps still to be produced, which are the products of further working on that one map together with the other maps. Is that well understood?
This is correct, that's just for demonstrative purposes at
That will
this
come
point in
later.
time.
Will we be able to use them tomorrow, Your Honor?
I take it that if you ask Mr. Westby, I'm quite confident that he would agree that it would be at your disposal. Mr. Westby?
Certainly.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Then we'll resolve this matter of maps at a later stage. Mr. Tiger, could you give us already an indication on how much time you'd need after the break we'll have soon?
Your Honor, I'll need the rest of the time available for the day to complete, and I'll be moving quickly as I do.
Yes, then we'll have a break until 20 minutes past 12, which means, Mr. Tiger, that you have 1 hour and 25 minutes then remaining.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All rise. Very for the very.